I'm Wyatt Ritchie. I run Kane Brothers, which is a 43-year-old investment bank that's exclusively focused on healthcare all that time, which then means we've seen a lot of these physician consolidation MSO strategies come and go. Talk a little bit about, strategic partners with MSOs, getting away from private equity. We can argue those are strategic partnerships as well. We'll just start off, Angela, just in terms of, and I don't know if we need to go into eyebrow raising yet, but maybe just some of the things that you're seeing in your practice area around new entrants or maybe reemergence of old entrants that are looking to partner with physicians.
Yeah, sure. So I think the evolution that we've seen in the MSO space has been driven by a number of factors. I mean, one, as we all have heard today, there is less interest currently by private equity firms as a whole in physician practice management and MSO models. But I think beyond that, physician alignment is one of the most important things when you're, looking to partner with a group and how you align the physicians long term. And I think, in terms of the strategic acquirers, they are not built for an exit. They're built for operating sustainability, long-term partnerships. You're not looking to flip the organization in 5 years and ensure that the physicians hold equity at the next exit and leave the rest to the next buyer. Now, we've seen in some cases a lot of private equity backed MSOs that are great consolidators, but not necessarily integrators. And I think some of the large scale organizations, and I'm thinking about the Cardinal Health play in particular, bring a lot of scale, operating experience to the relationships that they're able to deploy across their platform. And having done a transaction with the Cardinal Health platform, I will say that was palpable compared to other experiences that I've had.
Todd, just any reason to be more optimistic about some of these new strategic partners than private equity, or time will tell? I'm just curious.
No.
What's your take?
No, I don't think so. It really comes down to building, right? And whether it's a strategic like an Optum or a Cardinal, and you think about what Cardinal is doing, what McKesson has done, what Cencora has done with OneOncology. You're putting capital into these practices, but you're doing that in order to create scale and in order to create a customer base, right? So if you think about what some of these drug manufacturers are doing with aligning with physicians, right, is that those physicians are buying drugs and they can lock those physicians into buying drugs and they can also manage those practices. And Optum, right, they're buying practices because they can leverage the large employed physician model and have that clinical integration so they can take care of value-based arrangements. It's all capital. And so whether it's large organizations or private equity, ultimately physicians can't build scale on their own, taking home what they're taking home, and they need the backing of large, whether it's institutional or private equity, they need it. And so I think, in a lot of ways, it's probably what you're seeing with more strategic buyers right now is it's an opportunity because the private equity firms have shied away a little bit because interest rates have sucked, because the rate of return that they're getting isn't as good, because maybe there's been some bad press out there. And also, we'll talk about it more, but the regulatory framework right now and the scrutiny that is being laid on private equity it has an effect. Like the people are worried about whether they can actually get deals done.
Josh, how about you? Any further comments on?
Yeah, look, I think Cardinal is a great example, right, where you have a DME/pharma distributor that's gotten into the business. Now, the way I sort of view those series of acquisitions is more private equity sponsors that had held on to a PPM asset for quite a bit of time that was now facilitating an exit at a premium valuation or multiple. Whether or not that translates into downward activity for smaller PPMs that are now going to get folded in to the platform that Cardinal has built will to be determined, right? Whether those sort of premium valuations will continue is a really meaningful question to be answered. There is some competitive stakes there with McKesson, who did 2 acquisitions in 25, one in oncology and another in ophthalmology, so there could be some competitive tensions there that could allow for a nice trend where there's some more acquisitions there. I do want to point out one other area where I think is going to be really interesting to follow. We've had my firm the privilege to be in some of the boardrooms of some of the largest for-profit health systems and payers. And I think there's going to be a wave, potential waves of consolidation there, where you have PPMs that are already working with some of those systems and some of those payers, and whether or not there will be winners and losers as those consolidate in choosing between one relative to another is also to be determined. But it could be an interesting way to refine the list or narrow who is actually competing as scale becomes more meaningful as those enterprises begin to consolidate.
Norton, obviously, health systems have been an employer consolidator of physicians for ad infinitum. I'm just curious, picking up on that comment.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you see? And I'm also curious to your comment. There was an earlier panel that didn't have a lot of love lost for health systems. So I'm curious, what does that mean for?
I was wondering if there are any health system folks in the audience, look, when you're in a market like New York, like the metropolitan New York area, and you have several major health systems that are competing with each other, not just competing with MSOs, but really competing with each other. I mean, I often think about there are pockets like on Long Island in the suburbs of Long Island, Westchester, where you can drive down a particular street. You can literally see the sign from NYU and Northwell and Columbia Presbyterian and Mount Sinai, all acquiring practices. And so does that make sense? I think the answer is generally yes. I think that they're just capturing market share. They're looking to feed the mothership with tertiary care as they need to, especially as more and more moves to the outpatient side. So I think that in a market like this, and healthcare being a local business, that's likely to change, if not accelerate. And especially as I think the MSO acquisitions tend to slow down a bit, or have slowed down, certainly in the last several years. I think that the hospital systems are playing a larger role and will likely continue to do so. I mean, I think that also in terms of strategics, my original answer to you was going to be, sometimes yes and sometimes no. And I think that when you look at, like the Walgreens Village MD sort of debacle and what happened there, is that a failed strategic? Does that make sense? I mean, I think that every deal has to be looked at on its merits and what its motives are and how well it could execute.
Right. Well, if it's just chasing market share, I'm not sure that that's going to be a satisfactory answer to employers and others looking to lower costs. But right. I do agree with you, at least certainly in certain markets, that is the basis.
I think it's important to
competition.
I think it's to recognize though that health systems aren't stupid, right? I mean, they're incredibly smart people, and they're looking at they know that everybody's looking at them in that way. And so you can look at strategic partnerships that are successful that involve health systems. You talked about PT Solutions. I mean, that is an organization that partners with hospital systems to create outpatient physical therapy. This is because they get better reimbursement outside, right? You talk about Go Health, which is an urgent care partnership that partners with health systems to create urgent care that's branded with health system. Ascension just is buying AmSurg, right? Why? There's 250 surgery centers where we're all talking about hospital systems we want to take surgeries out of the hospital system and put them into these surgery centers. Well, why is the hospital system buying 250 sites, right? Because hospitals understand that they are getting bashed down like this, and a lot of the struggles that you've seen even in MSOs, like if you think about AmSurg, that comes out of Envision, right? Well, Envision's a crazy failure, right? But that's a hospital failure. That's an inpatient hospital failure. So I think hospitals have to respond. The acquisition of physician practices across the country by hospitals, I think, has been largely a complete and utter failure. I don't know that you can think of any success other than like a Kaiser type of model that has actually worked when a hospital is involved.
Probably depends on the practice area, but generally speaking, it's a pretty checkered history. I would agree. Speaking of checkered histories, though, Angela, private equity. What do you think? You think that they will? What's your diagnosis of this last wave? Will they reemerge? And also, just what's caused this backup and this lack of interest in your mind?
Yeah, so I think you will see continued consolidation by private equity in certain sectors. I don't think we're going to see the wave we saw in 2021 anytime soon, if ever. I mean, we're continuing to see interest in specialties like urology, like gastroenterology, where there's a drug play, in particular oncology, maybe cardiology, but practices where there's the ability to, have a play other than the pure MSO model, the ability to add ancillary services, improve revenue, capture additional revenue. So I don't think it's going to come back in full force. The private equity clients who I work with have said they think that there will be winners and losers. The good companies will survive and thrive, but we are going to see continued consolidation. And no secret, we've seen some failures over the last several years. I mean, there are private equity backed PPM companies that are now in the hands of the lenders. And in some cases, they're trying to operate them. And in some cases, it's going well. And in some cases, not so well. What has contributed to this, in my view, has been in some cases, as I said before, a failure of physician alignment. In the first phase of this last private equity PPM wave, we saw structures where rollover equity had linear vesting with 20% a year for 5 years. And no surprise, you get to the end of the 5-year timeline and physicians start to exit. I've had physicians say, I'm placing zero value on my rollover equity. And so being able to keep your physicians aligned and engaged has been a challenge for some private equity backed platforms based on the structures that they implemented. In some cases, they've tried to adjust those and evolve. In some cases, they've been able to. In some cases, they haven't. And then how you engage your physicians on a day-to-day basis in terms of physician alignment, I can't overemphasize that. I mean, I have seen situations where the private equity platform, promised a true synthetic partnership where all the physicians would have a seat at the table. The private equity firm promised income repair. They come in, they tell the physicians what implants they're going to use, how many nurse practitioners they can have, and it's a disaster because the physicians become completely dissatisfied and they've been promised autonomy and they don't really have it. Conversely, I've seen platforms with large strategic that have a single physician owner who owns the entire practice. And they pitch that to the physicians as the need to do so for payer contracting purposes, integration, benefits management. But they do give the physicians local autonomy. They have actual local, regional, national physician clinical governance boards that are actually functioning, and the physicians don't see a real change in their day-to-day practice. In addition, I've seen large strategic platforms that offer the physicians liquidity on retirement. Some PPMs, if you retire, they have the option to buy your rollover equity. They don't do that. They want the physician to stay in until the next exit. And some of the strategic acquirers have said, no, if you retire, we will give you liquidity. Now, interestingly, they don't put that in writing because they have the option if you look at their governing documents, but they socialize the physicians, the proposition that they will have a liquidity opportunity. And even though it's optional, they've executed on it. And so it has built trust element with the physicians in some cases that is just not there in other platforms.